This is Conspirinormal.
Welcome back to Conspirinormal. I just rolled in from 2 hours away to get my second shot
on the Chattanooga Choo Choo.
Yeah, I'm feeling really, really well, and got the second shot today. Got my nanobots in my body, feeling well. Gonna get my 5G connection. My Bill Gates gonna start running Windows on my system here.
Then you're to report to duty in the Dulce Base.
What? That's right. That's right. Reporting for duty in the Dulce Base with the cattle and all that stuff, because we have, you can hear him laughing, we have Adam Gorightly with us. Adam, welcome back to Conspirinormal.
Greetings, humans.
Yeah, greetings to you as well. We were just talking a little bit before in the little pre-show thing that we like to do, little ritual. We were just talking about how many times that I've had you on, and I'd say it's probably got to be a good 6 or 7 at this point. Because I've had you on your own shows individually, and then we've also done several roundtables with you, which, by the way, there was one of those roundtables that you actually saved our asses. Because,
I had the recording.
Yeah, you had the recording going, and we had like total power outage. And
oh yeah.
So we disappeared, and you and Aaron, Gullius, and Red Pill Junkie just like kept going for like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
While we were gone.
Yeah, you guys held it down.
Yeah, Adam Gorightly. That was an honor to actually have Adam Gorightly like host my show for 15 minutes, because like I've listened to your stuff for an extremely long time. I used to drive around at night, listening to you, to your like was it Untamed Dimensions?
Yeah, Untamed Dimensions.
Yeah. So, like I said, you were one of the first persons I wanted to get on the show. So, welcome back, sir.
Well, thanks for having me.
Always good to have the crackpot historian. So, you have a new book out called Saucer, Spies, and Kooks.
Actually, Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks.
Saucers, Spooks, and
UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius.
Yeah, and this is a far-ranging book. You managed to pack in a lot of material in about like 200-something pages. And I'm pretty impressed. We actually talked about this. You were actually working on this book like 6 years ago when I had you on for like the 100th episode, and we were talking about some of this material. So it's kind of been a long road as far as like getting this book out, and you know, this thing's at least 5 years in the making. So, you know, what kind of led you to like writing a book about like the Dulce Base mythos, which I guess the book is centered around that, but it's not entirely about that. So,
yeah, that's kind of where it started. And I write about a fellow named Tal Levesque in the book, who I had the opportunity to meet. And he was a critical player in propagating the Dulce Base mythos. I met him back in 2007, I think it was. And at the time, I really didn't know his involvement in the whole Dulce Base mythos. And so that's all kind of revealed in the book. But at that time, I was just working on an article. That was 2007, 2008. Called My Breakfast with Tal. Is just a fascinating, interesting character, and that ended up being a chapter in the book. And so, yeah, part of the story was his involvement and the involvement of a lot of other people in, as I said, propagating what we'll call the Dulce Base mythos. So I started looking into that. You know, I was familiar somewhat with the Dulce Base story back in the day, but I, around that time, 2008, 2009, took a deep dive into the story and all the various allegations, conspiracies revolving around Dulce. And basically that deep dive was like to separate the fact and the fiction. I was working on an article at that time called Deconstructing Dulce. So yeah, that was over 10 years ago. And so I'd work on it for a while. I figured it'd be like a 10,000 word article. But I was also working on other books, so I'd end up setting it aside for a couple of years and probably, then pick it up again. And when I talked to you guys, whenever you said that was 2015, 2016.
It was like December 2015, I think.
I was getting back into it, and I thought, I was close to finishing it. But as it goes with a lot of these projects, uncover it, more information, and interviewed more people that led me to other people and other information, and it could go on forever. But yeah, finally finished it up here recently and got it out of my hair.
The labyrinth of rabbit holes.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah, underground rabbit holes, right? So where you start off in the book, you start off with the whole like saucer crash mythology. And I know that like a lot of people say that, the saucer crashes, they happened in the 40s and all this, but the way that I look at all this stuff, like this kind of like mythology really kind of starts in like the 70s. So this is kind of what really kind of gets the ball rolling. I guess this thing is like a snowball that just gathers more and more until it becomes an avalanche. Like we start with some small little things that people are speculating about, and then it becomes just ridiculous. So let's kind of talk about some of like the saucer crash mythology and kind of where that starts.
Yeah, I get into that a bit in the book. A lot of people point to a book by a guy named Frank Scully called Behind the Flying Saucers, which was published in 1950. And the first versions of this were in a Variety magazine article that Scully published, and it later became this book, Behind the Flying Saucers. And it had to do with information he got from a couple sketchy characters, one of whom was this millionaire oil guy called Silas M. Newton, who claimed that he had a contact, Dr. G, who had examined the remains of some type of saucer crash. And so this story really developed back then, and the site of the saucer crash, according to this original story, you could call it the origin story, was in Aztec, New Mexico in 1948. And so that's kind of where the crash saucer mythos, a lot of people can pinpoint where it started. It was later discovered to be a hoax, big surprise there, but later saucer crash stories seem to resemble closely the story documented or presented Behind the Flying Saucers. There was a ship that crashed, and the government came in and hauled off the remains, and which include little alien midgets involved in the crash. All of this would...
They're little aliens, Adam.
Yes. Sorry. Be politically correct there. And so this would closely resemble other stories that emerged in the late 70s, one of which was the fabled Roswell crash.
Right, which kind of starts really with Stanton Friedman, really. Mm-hmm. Is the first person that really gets into that and finds Jesse Marcel, which at the time, the only thing that's really there is just the field of debris and kind of how weird the debris is. But then it just kind of gets more and more involved and complicated as it goes on.
And I think in the popular consciousness, like most people would think that it was the popularization of that was actually sooner, but it wasn't. It actually like comes later, and like Roswell wasn't even known about by most people at all.
No, it was kind of a little tidbit in history, and there was a buzz about it at the time back in 47. But the popular story we all have known to, been know about really emerged in 1979 with the book Incident at Roswell, or Roswell Incident. I always forget the exact title there. And it was based on, as you mentioned, Stanton Friedman's research with another ufologist writer by the name of Bill Moore. And in the early accounts of Marcel, there was no mention of aliens. That information only emerged later as the story developed and other witnesses came forward.
Right.
I remember there was a meme going around a couple years ago pointing out that Reynolds Wrap was also founded in 1947.
Oh,
so it just makes you think,
That's interesting. That's another rabbit hole.
Well, Guy Malone, he talks about what happened, it really happened at Roswell, and he gives some pretty compelling evidence that some of that material was stuff that actually was available at the time, that had been even invented in the 30s. That stuff that could you could crumple up and could return to an almost pristine form. And he does some pretty compelling research on that. And if you're there 1947 and you haven't seen anything like that, or it's kind of you don't know about it, you would think it's something from another world. So
yeah, and that's where it gets a bit murky with the whole story. Originally the buzz was it was an alien craft, and even some news reports at the time were saying that. But then a short time afterwards, Marcel did that newspaper article, where it looks just like some type of flimsy balloon with some foil type material or whatnot. Of course, afterwards, as the legend grew, that was part of the conspiracy. It was a cover up of sorts to claim that it was a weather balloon to hide, the true, quote unquote, true story of the Roswell crash, which included, dead aliens in the wreckage that were cordoned off and hauled off by the military to who knows where exactly. Right, Patterson Base is one of the places UFO lore pinpoints to, that they were there at Hangar 18 or wherever it was, where the material was taken to.
Yeah, the famous Hangar 18. So we get to the cattle mutilations. And this is where we kind of start getting into the Dulce Base.
Yeah.
So the cattle mutilations happen, and there's some there's some genuinely weird things about the cattle mutilation.
For sure.
Also in New Mexico. Southern Colorado, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how do we begin with the cattle mutilations and Linda Moulton Howe, and was it Gabe Valdez?
So it was going on in that general area, northern New Mexico into Colorado, and pretty large region was being hit, and one of those areas was Dulce, which I really focus on in the book, and that was in the mid 70s, around 76, I think they started. And a lot of these mutilations, which Gabe Valdez, who was a state trooper there in New Mexico, a lot of the cattle mutilations that he began investigating, because they were on his watch and in that general area, in many cases seemed to be associated with strange phenomenon, lights in the sky. And so, the story of mutilations and UFOs began becoming connected at that time. And also there were reports of military black helicopters at the scenes. So, a lot of the speculation became, well, are they UFOs or is it some secret government project? Even Satanists got entered into the mix and or aliens working in cahoots with the government. But so how the Dulce Base story evolved, we probably need to talk about Paul Benowitz and Myrna Hansen.
Yeah. Let's talk about Myrna Hansen first.
Well, in May of 1980, Myrna Hansen and her young son, Sean, I believe his name was, as an infant kid, they were driving through Eagle Nest, New Mexico, where they saw a flying saucer alien craft of some sort, and a tractor beam came down and sucked up a cow into the ship. And shortly after, both Myrna Hansen, who was like in her mid-20s, and her son also got sucked up into the ship, where they saw the cow being mutilated, very grisly and graphic. And at that time as well, she was placed into some type of trance, and there was some type of medical procedure done on her. Then afterwards, she was obviously horrified by what had gone down, and she contacted the local law enforcement in Cimarron, which was near Eagle Nest, New Mexico. And the local cops didn't know, how to deal with this, but they knew Gabe Valdez was the go-to guy for this kind of weird stuff related to cattle mutes and strange craft in the sky. So they contacted Gabe. Gabe, in turn, contacted Paul Benowitz, who we can talk about a little more later. But
we got to, yeah.
Benowitz had an interest in cattle mutes and UFOs, and was a member of APRO, the trying to remember the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization.
I think that's right. Yeah,
and which is similar to MUFON back in the day, a pretty big UFO organization. And it was through Benowitz that they brought in this hypnotic regression therapist by the name of Leo Sprinkle, who'd been doing regressions for a number of years at that point. Anyway, they took Benowitz took Hansen under his wing, trying to help her out, and they did a series of regression sessions in Benowitz's garage. As part of this, they did it actually in his Lincoln Town Car. They covered it with completely with foil because Benowitz, for some reason or another, became convinced that the aliens might try to interfere with the regression sessions and try to block Hansen's memories. Now, as these
that's awesome.
Yeah, as these regressions transpired, more information came out, and one piece of this was that she recalled being transported to an underground base somewhere that was an alien underground base, where she underwent more of these medical procedures and had a implant placed into the base of her skull. And at one point, she broke free of her captors and came across all these vats filled with like alien hybrid babies and just grisly, weird experiments, which it appeared that the aliens were involved with. And so ultimately, Paul Benowitz began to believe, or ultimately believes, that this underground base was the Dulce Base that's located on the Jicarilla Indian Reservation.
Yeah, that's the one thing too. Like, how does Benowitz get involved with UFOs? Is he starts to see strange lights around? He's around Albuquerque, I think.
Yeah, so he lived in Albuquerque, right adjacent to Kirtland Air Force Base, where all kinds of stuff was going on during that period with testing secret craft and also developing these advanced laser communications and this type of stuff. And Benowitz was a physicist, and he owned a company called Thunder Scientific. And besides that, as I mentioned, he had an interest in UFOs and cattle mutes and whatnots, and he began seeing strange lights over Kirtland Basin, in particular the Monsanto weapons facility, which at that time was the largest cache of nuclear weapon components in the U.S. And so he was aware of that, and he saw these lights over there and filmed them and took photos of the UFOs, and also began he construct this array of listening equipment that was picking up signals and transmissions that over time he became convinced that they were connected to these strange lights he was seeing. So he contacted the security there at Kirtland Base and let them know what was going on, and his desire was to get a government contract to further research the UFOs, but he ended up kind of getting the cold shoulder from the officials there at Kirtland, or at the very least, they didn't seem to be interested or take him seriously. So he kind of escalated his campaign to reveal what was going on there and started contacting different politicians, a couple of the U.S. senators in New Mexico, one of whom was Senator Pete Domenici. Also fired off letters to Ronald Reagan and other big political mucky mucks. He had developed during this period a paper called Project Beta. That later became the name of Greg Bishop's fine book on this subject. And part of this Project Beta report began talking about the underground base and how he was developing a space gun of sorts to deal with the alien scum and basically defeat them, because he believed this was basically an alien invasion that was happening.
And he then inserts himself into this cattle mutilation scene, right?
Yeah, he had been involved in the cattle mutilation scene for a while, actually, and that's how he came to know Gabe Valdez. I recount in 1979, there was this big cattle mutilation conference at the Albuquerque Library, and I think that's where he first met Valdez.
Adam, are there any pictures of like the billboard outside that said cattle mutilation conference?
I don't know. I could ask David Perkins. He was there at the conference, and I was just talking to him recently. He writes the foreword to this book.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He has. He just told me recently he had the whole transcripts of that conference. I wasn't aware those. There was transcripts of everything. But I'll ask him if there's any photos. It was a pretty wild scene, as I recount in the book. And so anyway, it was there that Benowitz met Gabe Valdez, started going out to Dulce on ride-alongs, some of these midnight ride-alongs where they would see these strange lights in the sky. And so Benowitz became interested in Dulce, during that period, 79, 80. And as time evolved, he began to suspect there was some type of base there. And that's where we kind of get to the involvement of Richard Doty in all of this.
Right, yeah. And Richard Doty is like very, very key to this whole thing. One of the best documentaries I've seen on the UFO subject is Mirage Men, which goes into this like completely. But yeah, we got to talk about Richard Doty, because this is the prime example of disinformation and just like flat out just messing with somebody's mind. You know, Richard Doty is extremely good at it.
And so Bill Moore kind of enters the picture too. We had talked about the crash saucers and his involvement in writing the incident at Roswell book. And so when that book was published in 1980, Moore was approached by a mysterious intelligence officer by the name, who's going by the handle of Falcon. Later on in the book, we get into more of Falcon and the Aviary, but anyway, Falcon approached Moore with the offer that he would share some top secret UFO information with him if Moore would assist him in infiltrating the UFO community, basically to assess perhaps national security risks among those involved in ufology. And also part of this ended up in Moore passing along some questionable documents that were part of a counterintelligence campaign or disinformation program. And a lot of those kind of supposedly leaked documents that falsified to show an alien menace were passed on to Paul Benowitz. And so Doty himself began interacting with Benowitz. Doty was with the AFOSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and he was based out of Kirtland Base there. And according to a lot of people who've looked at this, one of whom was like researcher Kristen Lambright, who has a very good book on this subject too, called X Descending. The motivation behind this, and Greg Bishop pretty much, I think he's on the same page with Lambright, is that they were trying to divert Benowitz's attention from Kirtland, where there was a lot of testing of secret technology, and push him out towards Dulce Base, or that area where they could be more easily perhaps manipulated. And one of the things that got his attention, according to different reports, is Doty took him on a helicopter ride, flew over Dulce, where he pointed out some areas that it was suspected there was an alien base. And so Benowitz himself was a licensed pilot, and afterwards he began a bunch of reconnaissance over the Dulce Base, and supposedly started seeing stuff that led him to suspect that there was indeed a alien base there, and he started tying all of this information together. In one of the early reports, Benowitz, I think he sent this to Senator Pete Domenici. This was around 82. He was talking about evidence that he uncovered about this base, and that there had been some type of confrontation there, late 79 or 80, said, where the U.S. government lost control of the base to the aliens. This information would later play a large part in the Dulce Base mythos that really began circulating in popular culture in like 1989. Mm-hmm. Another source of Benowitz's information, or how he was getting fucked with, has to do with a computer that was allegedly passed on to him by J. Allen Hynek, of all people, who was
Okay.
Yeah.
who was still working for the government then, Hynek of Blue Book fame. And this information came initially from Bill Moore. They were having adult beverages at one point, and Hynek shared this information with him and later appeared in Greg Bishop's book. Greg broke the scoop, but I've talked to other people since then who actually saw this computer. It was a computer with the software program embedded in it that allowed Benowitz to talk to the aliens, and that's where he was getting a lot of this his information. He was supposedly, or so he thought, talking directly to the ETs through this computer, and was also seeing images of what they looked like. And this has been confirmed by a few people. Greg Valdez, who's Gabe Valdez's son, they visited Benowitz one time and saw him talking to the computer and getting messages from it. And Richard Doty has also confirmed this. Of course, got to be careful with anything Doty goes on record about.
Yeah, no doubt. Just a proven disinformation agent.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about Benowitz. Was there any time that he thought to himself, am I being messed with? Or was he just such a true believer that he just, like, to phrase the X-Files, I want to believe, which, by the way, all this mythology goes into the X-Files. This is all in the X-Files. Every bit of it. Every bit of
totally. Yeah, I should, back to Myrna Hansen for a second. I'll answer your other question about Benowitz. Yeah, a lot of the pieces, parts, components of her experience, fed right into a lot of the stuff we saw in the X-Files, and by the mid-90s, when that became popular. We had the connection to cattle mutilations and missing time, and she had an alien implant, and there was medical procedure done to her, and also the whole thing about the underground base and all the hybrid human alien babies. All of that later emerged in the X-Files, and bits and pieces of this were in other accounts, but Myrna Hansen's experience seemed to have all those pieces in it, all those parts that later, would become so prevalent in pop culture. And as far as Benowitz, did he feel he was being messed with? Well, he felt the aliens were messing with him for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows? When he went off the deep end towards in the mid '80s or so, he felt he was convinced that ETs or Men in Black were breaking into his home and shooting him up with drugs, and so he was really a mess. I'm sure but that was kind of the design. There was a document called this Aquarius memo that Bill Moore, Doty passed to Bill Moore in, I forget the exact date. It was early on there, 80, 81. And the original version of this didn't have any mention of aliens, and there was a second version that was passed on to Bill Moore that mentioned ETs in it, and Moore began to suspect, or so he said, that Doty had basically fabricated or added this ET element to an official government document, and Doty wanted Moore to pass it on to Paul Benowitz, and Moore was initially reluctant to do this, but at one point Doty said, either pass it on to him or we're going to end our arrangement with you. So reluctantly Moore passed it on, and what the intent of the document, what Moore later said was basically they wanted to get this into Benowitz's hand, so he'd call some type of press conference and blow the whistle on it and use it to discredit him. And so, that could be seen as a lot of the reason for the disinformation campaign or counterintelligence campaign was that, Benowitz was actually picking up some classified information, and with, picking up all these signals and things going on, these coded signals at Kirtland, which were basically one of them was related to this laser program communicating with satellites, and it was
it was probably SDI stuff.
Yeah, early on, and so that was part of the intent or motivation to discredit him, because if he came out with some of this information at some point, they could just point to him and say he was nuts. Thought he was picking up these alien communications.
Well, I think it's really important to stress, like, why the hell these intelligence people would be interested in UFOs and UFO people. And like, one reason is that so many of them are either in or interested in aviation. There's a lot of people who are like either in or on the periphery of like the military industrial complex. They have little companies that are trying to get contracts. And then they, when all this real base interest starts and people start all this UFO watching outside of these bases, they're like seeing, possibly experimental aircraft, and then Benowitz is like intercepting signals. So there's a lot of reasons why, they would be interested in these people who would seem just to be really marginal.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I get into it quite a bit in the book. Yeah, there's a lot of people in ufology who are also involved, and probably still like this quite a bit, involved in, with government contracts and aviation. Even some of them were working on the parts of the stealth program, though they didn't have the big picture, but that was part of the interest. And you had, going back, definitely back in the 70s, but even before that, a lot of foreign nationals, basically Russians and Chinese, getting involved and communicating with, these different folks in ufology who belong to these different UFO organizations. So that, that goes back to the arrangement with Falcon and Bill Moore, that they wanted him to infiltrate ufology to find out, not only to spread disinformation and confuse people, but to find out who these different folks in ufology were communicating with, such as these foreign nationals, to find out what they might know, to pass on information to them. Like in some cases, example is, say you have some UFO, quote unquote UFO photos, but it's really some stealth technology or something, to pass some of this on and see what kind of reactions, if they could get a sense of how much different foreign spies knew about programs, but and also to pass on some bad information to confuse them about these various different stealth projects and other things the government was involved with.
I know it's speculated in Mirage Men that some of the things that Benowitz may have been seeing was like early drone technology too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, this computer though, and that he said that he saw like the alien forms and all this type of things. could we speculate that this was, since, I mean, Doty gives him this computer. Can we speculate that these are the Air Force guys, like, just messing with him on this thing?
Seems pretty safe.
Monitoring him as well. It was Hynek that gave it to him.
Right.
Supposedly. Right. And I mean, there was other weird shit going on at Benowitz's house, too, that Moore and Doty claimed to have seen little orbs that would show up from time to time. And there's one account that Doty and some NSA supposedly was also involved in this National Security Agency. And a lot of times they are stationed at military bases. You have NSA, which is, and so, and Benowitz was seen as a possible national security threat, or, you know, potentially. And anyway, Doty and these NSA guys broke into Benowitz's home at one point and saw these orbs there, you know, and they all looked at each other. Doty had seen them before, but this was the first time the NSA guys saw them, and they were asking Doty, "Are those yours?" And he was asking them, "No, are they yours?" No, so. But once again, who knows what to make of all this? But you know, so this thing, like this computer with the software and these orbs, you know, they would also mess with his mind, but they could also be surveilling and tracking what he was up to.
I was going to be facetious and ask you earlier if it was the Promise software, but yeah, I mean, the whole thing is interesting. It sounds a little bit like, too, that there's a targeted individual aspect of this, because, I mean, I don't know. Have you read Robert Guffey's Cameleo?
Oh, yeah, great book.
It sounds very, very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to MJ12. I want to talk about a little bit about the MJ12 documents. Bill Moore is also behind this as well. He's a part of this whole process.
Well, he's associated with it for sure. Is he behind it? Who knows? Is Doty behind it? A lot of people have speculated, you know, about the MJ12 papers, but they mysteriously showed up on the doorstep of Jamie Chandere, who became Bill Moore's research partner in the early 1980s. And this was 1984 when they showed up, and it was basically on these stuff on 16 millimeter film that they developed and discovered they looked like they were these classified or secret documents about this MJ12 group who had briefed President Eisenhower back in 1952, I think it was, on the alien, the ET threat and UFOs. And also in there was information about the Roswell crash and aliens dead and alive that had been pulled out of the wreckage. And so these, you know, one thing these documents did, was to confirm the story Bill Moore had written about a few years before that, is documented in the Roswell incident. So it's kind of a self-confirming loop. The package that ended up on Chandera's doorstep was postmarked Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so, you know, a lot of people think that pointed back to Doty, who did have a history with sketchy documents even prior to that.
Man, Doty was an extremely active guy, wasn't he? Like, he's doing a lot of stuff.
No one's ever proved
Wow.
who was behind the documents, though.
Well, that's something interesting. A lot of this, of everything in this book revolves around this like cottage industry of these fake or semi-fake documents, or like this pseudepigrapha of either government documents or witness statements of mysterious witnesses who no one ever knows who they are, and some of this stuff comes to light later, and even like counterclaims to authorship, and it's like,
Yeah, there was like a series of documents, and the first one that really started Moore's involvement with this before he met up with Falcon or Doty had to do with this thing called the Weitzel letter, which I think APRO got a copy sent to them in July of 1980. And what it documented was this guy, what do they call him, Civil Air Patrol cadet by the name of Greg Weitzel, who had been out with his Civil Air Patrol group, and they saw a UFO land and some creature get out of it and bop around and then take off. That's what was in this letter. And it also said that they returned after they were done with this outing. And in the outing, I'm trying to remember, they said it was, where did it take place at? I'm trying to pull up the letter now, but part of it was the cover. There was actually an incident that happened in Dulce that this letter was talking about, but a lot of the facts had been changed, so it was kind of like more of this disinformation. And in the letter, it talked about a Mr. Doty, D-O-D-Y, and there's all these weird kind of things that kind of pointed back to Doty as well. And Moore looked into this letter and found out it was a hoax, and apparently his analysis of it is what came to the attention of Falcon and Doty as well. And they thought, well, if he was Moore was astute enough to determine this document was a hoax, then he could be of value to them, which I think was one of the things that initiated their involvement together.
Okay. Yeah, it's all these different things that are getting weaved. And I want to also, since I like to attribute things to people that do the research, Nick Redfern, has done a lot of research on the MJ12 documents. And one time we had him on, I think the last time we'd had him on, like he had some interesting stuff about that. There were actually some that might have been done by like Soviet intelligence as some misinformation. So I thought that was pretty interesting as well. That could be a part of it too.
Well, and part of the deal is there's different letters, or there's been different series of MJ12 related documents that have emerged over the years, and they may or may not be connected to each other. There was the first series with
right
that were associated with Bill Moore and Stanton Friedman. Then there was the material that Redfern got access to, and I'm trying to remember of the character who basically was the one who was the source of that material. His name escapes me right now. But then you have even more recently, there was more MJ12 related documents that Heather Wade, who was the one who was Art Bell's producer for a while, then took over his show, and she had eventually kind of had some type of meltdown and was going to raid Area 51, and then she kind of disappeared. But
I remember that. That was very recently. Yeah,
yeah, that was
a couple of years ago, I think.
4 or 5 years ago, and she said she received some MJ12 papers from a trusted source, and they were even more outlandish than previous versions of MJ12 materials. And you had there was like this. In the 90s, there was a crash retrieval document that came out, a manual for crash retrievals, which is also kind of in the MJ12 wheelhouse. And once again, those materials, I think the researcher was named Berliner, ended up with the materials in the same way that Jamie Chandray came to him on these basically 16 millimeter film that he had to develop, and once again, anonymous sources, nobody can track this stuff down, but they for sure made a big impact on ufology. Good number of people think they're hoaxes, but then there's still a lot of true believers who buy into this stuff. Linda Howe, for one, is a big proponent of that so-called crash retrieval document.
Which she was messed with Doty. Doty kind of messed with her as well. The crash retrieval stuff, is that the same as like the fire department had to like retrieve UFOs? Is that what you're talking about? Because I've seen that on a doc. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's like this like weird document for fire departments to retrieve crash. I'm serious. It actually exists. I'm not. I didn't dream this. Richard Doty told me. So, I want to talk a little bit about the Aviary and also the UFO Cover-Up Live, which is one of the greatest television events of all time.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So I actually pulled up here who is in the Aviary from your book. This is from page 88, which I was going to ask you and put you on the spot, but I figured I'd just put it up. So you have listed here Richard Doty was Sparrow, Robert Collins as Condor, Erdie Kellerstrauss as Hawk. Interesting thing is our friend Dr. Future, Mike Bennett, actually worked at Wright-Patterson for Kellerstrauss.
Oh, no shit. Yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah. It was one of his, he was a civilian contract worker for the Air Force, and he worked doing it was like fire control and suppression. And I'm pretty sure it's Kellerstrauss that he said that he worked for there. Dale Graff as Harrier, John Alexander Penguin, Jamie Chandra Woodpecker, C.B. Scott Jones Chickadee, Dr. Christopher Kit Green, who's in all the SRI material, as Blue Jay, Dr. Hal Puthoff, who's also SRI, as Al, Dr. Ron Pandolfi as Pelican. So these are some of the guys that were also involved with the whole UFO Cover-Up Live show back in the 80s.
Yeah. So basically the story behind the Aviary was that it was this group of intelligence insiders and also different ufologists, scientists, kind of this ad hoc group that got together to basically share their knowledge with each other. Apparently, all of them had little pieces of the puzzle, and so the intent of the group, at least one way it's presented, is that they were just trying to bring about UFO disclosure and inch humanity closer to the truth of UFOs. Others have basically placed more nefarious things on this group, that they were, involved in a huge disinformation campaign and activities of that nature. And, as far as who they are and their names, their code names, I mean, it depends on how deep you go into this and who you talk to. I kind of put this together from available information that's been out there over the years, but some of the code names at times are interchangeable, and some people claim they were part of the group. Others who have been stated and alleged to be of the Aviary deny involvement. So it gets pretty damn confusing. And it was kind of a big thing in the late 80s when this group was kind of revealed and talked about it. Everybody is trying to figure out exactly what was going on and who was involved. And as you mentioned, John Alexander has been linked to this group. And at the same time, Alexander was involved with the Aviary. He's also had another group called the Advanced, what were they called? They've had a few different names. The Advanced Physics group that around 1980 was a similar ad hoc group that was talked about in the book by Ralph Blum called Out There, I think it was. He was a journalist for the New York Times, and they were basically kind of doing the same thing that the Aviary was, but it was an actual group in the military. And originally in the book, it didn't mention John Alexander, but Alexander later was revealed as the one who headed up that kind of ad hoc group looking into UFOs. So
That's an excellent book, by the way. I've read that book.
And, some people have pointed to the possibility that Aviary was kind of, once again, a cover story of what was Alexander was really involved with, or perhaps some type of disinformation operation. A lot of these players really go back. There was an involvement. There's recurring themes, the psychic component or remote viewing kind of plays a big part in the overall story presented, in my book. And Hal Puthoff and Kit Green, you mentioned SRI, they were involved with Uri Geller back in the day. That was in the early 70s. So you have all these characters. I mean, Alexander as well, that has this long history, interest in psychic phenomena, UFOs, but also non-lethal technologies and different type of technologies that can alter consciousness. And so, the remote viewing is an interesting aspect of all of this too. Del Graff, who is supposedly Harrier within this group, the Aviary, had a group of remote viewers at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I think it went as like in the as early as like the beginning of the 70s, that they were doing some non-official remote viewing, and it has been said or alleged that it was Del Graff's group who remote viewed the Roswell crash. And I've always thought that was pretty interesting, that perhaps the Roswell MJ-12 papers were actually remote material that was remote viewed, and they put the MJ-12 papers out there to find out if they could actually prove or get more evidence, have people come forward that could confirm what Del Graff and his group was remote viewing about a Roswell crash.
Okay, that's interesting.
I don't think I went. I don't think I went there in the book.
Yeah, that almost like they're trying to like get confirmation of what they actually saw, or that what they huh.
I mean, that would be one way of doing that. You know, they remote viewed this stuff, but they can't prove it. Maybe somebody else within the government knows. Let's release these documents that and from our remote viewing sessions and present them as the real deal, and see if we can get some type of confirmation from somebody about it. So, you know, in the aviary, maybe they actually half believed, or, you know, or this is one of the things they were trying to get to the bottom of, you know, of material that was coming through their research into psychic phenomenon, remote viewing, you know, to confirm some of the stuff that was being remote viewed.
So UFO Cover Up Live, we get to that, and some of the, of course, the aviary is involved in this as well. Of course, you know, the classic blacked out faces and the computerized voice, which is always fun. This pretty much is like when we talked about the X-Files. I mean, this is the X-Files, like before the X-Files happened.
Yeah.
Like, I don't remember this. I mean, I might have been like 12, I don't know, maybe 12 years old or something when this came out. But what I do remember, and I will add to this, is that there were these two documentaries about like maybe 6 months or a year apart from each other in the early 90s that were Is Elvis Alive documentaries hosted by Bill Bixby. And these were essentially, if you watch UFO Cover Up Live, it was essentially the same thing. It was like, if you have any information about UFOs and aliens, about the government involvement, call this number. And then the other one was, if you have any information on whether Elvis is alive, call this number. So it was just very much the same. It had the exact same format. I'm just putting that out there. Mm-hmm. And you can find all these treasures on YouTube, people. They're all there for you to enjoy, including the Geraldo Satanic Panic special, too. So if you really just want to have a good night, those are the 4 things you should watch.
Yeah, I got to check out those Elvis things. I think I remember seeing them back in the day.
There's something. They're perfect because they're just like, they have the reenactments of the Elvis sightings. And there's like even one point where like somebody sees Elvis in a bar and like Elvis just like walks slowly into the light and disappears. It's just the same kind of just like, you know, in search of unsolved mysteries kind of television. It's great. It's excellent. Anyway, not to derail everything.
Yeah.
But it just reminded me very much of that.
And part of it, you know, Bill Moore had a pretty large role in UFO Cover Up Live. It was hosted by Mike Farrell of MASH fame. Mm-hmm. And Stanton Friedman's in it, as well as Jamie Chandray, and also Falcon and Condor, 2 supposed members of the aviary. I don't believe they even called them in the talked about the aviary in the show, but these 2 characters were like in the shadows, and their voices were scrambled, and they were alleged military intelligence people, and they basically repeated, among other things, the UFO crash story, and how there was an alien that survived, and all of this led to a kind of human ET exchange program. And one of these guys was, like I said, referred to as Falcon. It was later revealed to be none other than our old friend Richard Doty.
Right.
Even though Doty denied this, I still think he is has continued to deny this over the years, or on other times he has said, well, I was just being a proxy for the real Falcon.
Oh, okay.
But a lot of the stuff that would emerge in UFO cover-up live would basically become etched into UFO lore. One of the first mentions of Area 51, I think, appeared in UFO cover-up live, as well as they get heavily into the whole MJ12 Roswell crashes well, and that as well, and also the Cash Landrum crash, which Doty was also involved with. So all of this seemed to be basically the culmination of this counterintelligence disinformation campaign that had been going on since the late 70s, and it all kind of played out on UFO Cover-Up Live. And among that was the guy named Robert Emenager, who talked about in 1975 he was approached by the military. He had done other documents. He was a TV producer, and him and his co-producer, Alan Sandler, I think his name was, were approached at one point to do a UFO documentary, and that the Air Force and also other branches of the military were interested in working with them on this, and that they would provide them with top secret documents and whatnot, and also film footage of an actual saucer landing with ETs, and so they began this collaboration on this project, which ultimately ran aground when at the 11th hour, for some reason, the Air Force pulled out of the project, did not deliver the goods, and left them hanging, and left them high and dry. And so you've seen this pattern play out time and again through ufology, where UFO disclosure is just about to happen, and at the last minute the rug gets pulled out from under the feet of the participants, and they're in some cases discredited or made to look bad. And the same thing happened. Emenager, still with Emenager in the military, happened in the mid-70s, and in the early 80s the same situation happened with Linda Moulton Howe, and this was after she had had success with her documentary on cattle mutilations called The Strange Harvest. She was working on another project, and she'd been tapped by HBO to produce this UFO documentary, and she was interacting with a lot of these players. Paul Benowitz, trying to get his story. She was interested in that. The Association of Cattle Mutilations with UFO sightings. And so she approached Doty at one point, and they had a secret meeting, which I talk about in the book, and Linda Howe has also recounted this story many times, where she was basically kind of offered the same deal as Bob Emenager. She was shown documents, many of which sounded like the material that would later rear its head in the MJ12 documents about crash saucers and secret program and an alien in captivity, et cetera, et cetera. And also she was promised film footage, once again, of a UFO landing, and like military bigwigs meeting with aliens out on a tarmac somewhere. And as in the Emmenager episode, the same thing happened with Linda Howe. Eventually, she was strung along and left high and dry, left out to kind of blow in the wind. The promised goods were never delivered, and ultimately her HBO UFO documentary never came to be.
Emmenager claims that he saw it. Does he claim that he saw it? That they just told him that?
Well, I believe he saw some of the footage, and later that his documentary was produced, but it didn't have the actual aliens in the film footage. But I think some of that footage, but it's not very impressive what he ended up with. It's just one of these kind of vague, shiny lights in the sky that could be anything.
Yeah, Eisenhower wasn't shaking hands with O.H. Krill.
No, none of that happened.
That wasn't. They were sharing a strawberry ice cream.
And so you see this same scenario play out time and again in ufology.
Right.
Of the much promised UFO disclosure coming any day now.
Sounds familiar.
And the researchers who get tangled up in all of this later end up with egg on their face and, are discredited.
In addition to the ripples left by this television special, there's another big media influence in the Billy Goodman radio show, which he really took advantage of all these people around that scene. And this is kind of like the prototype for Art Bell.
Yeah, for sure. And that was one of the things I happened upon the Billy Goodman happening, as it was called, and I guess that was 89. And originally we were talking about Elvis before. The show was originally called The Thing, and this was like it in what was it was a station out of Las Vegas, and Billy started this show in early '89, and it was just kind of a call-in show, and he was looking at strange stuff like, was Elvis still alive? He had some guest on there. It was Elvis Presley Jr. Forget what the deal was. And, they had an interest in woo-woo, ghost stories, and this type of stuff. And at some point, Area 51 became a deal, and he had Bob Lazar showed up on the program quite a bit, and you had this whole cast of characters that became prevalent in ufology during this period. Bill Cooper and other characters I talk about in the book, and it became kind of a really popular regional show. And like I said, I just happened upon it back in the day. I had a GE Super Radio, and I'd go through the AM dial, and it was broadcast late at night, so it covered a huge area. And so I became an avid fan of this. And basically, the whole Area 51 and Bob Lazar drama played out over the airwaves on the Billy Goodman happening back in the day. He started out, it was like from originally the show, I write about this in the book, it was like from 8 to 10 at night, but then they kept changing the hours, and there was like stories of bomb threats and all this stuff because apparently Billy was just releasing or having these people on his show who were blowing the whistle, and the powers that be were becoming concerned about it. Goodman also led some these trips out to Area 51 when it became the thing to go out there and witness the craft. This was before it got shut down. So basically, the Goodman Show was ground zero for this whole scene back in the day. And ultimately, they kept changing the hours until he was on like from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. And it was like, what's going on here?
It's a bad slot.
This was a hugely popular show, but he's getting dicked around by who knows. There was a lot of rumors, and all of a sudden the show was off the air and he was gone. And actually, Art Bell was aware of the show, and he had mentioned Billy Goodman a bit over years, that they had been friends. So it definitely seemed like this became a later influence on Art Bell. You could see, how a show of this nature could become wildly popular.
Yeah, I like the part in the book where you have the transcript of the him talking to this worker at one of the supposed bases.
Yeah.
The guy doesn't know that apparently they're acting like the guy doesn't know that he's on air,
And he'd get a lot of calls like that of, people claiming to be workers at Area 51, insiders. One of them was called Yellow Fruit, who shared a story quite similar to the Dulce Base security workers there, that he was at a base with a dual base that had humans and aliens working there, and that there was a confrontation at one time. And, so there was all these so-called anonymous whistleblowers who would call into the show, sharing the revelations of what was going on at Area 51. I talk about the meeting place was the Rachel Bar and Restaurant, which became the Little Alien, as it became known. And the groups would gather before they'd go out to Area 51 at the Little Alien. They had different conferences back in the day where, all the whistleblowers and people revealing what was going on would meet. The Norio Hayakawas and Anthony Hilders and Bill Cooper and Sean David Morton was a player back then. And, they'd take bus trips out to Area 51 and witness these strange aerial spectacles going on, which, became a huge phenomenon. Once again, Billy Goodman was at the center of all that.
Like some great radio. Is there? Are those recordings available anywhere online? Like that in particular, that call with the base worker.
Some of them are.
I would just love to hear that interview.
I have it. I'll put it up at some point. I have at my Chasing UFOs blog
Awesome.
something called the Dulce. Or it's called the Saucers, Spooks and Kooks resource page, and I have links there to different aspects of the books. And I've been thinking of posting that Yellow Fruit episode. Actually, there was a few episodes with Yellow Fruit, and as I talk about in the book, one of them, I suspect, the caller Yellow Fruit was actually my friend. Old pal Tal Levesque of Dulce Base fame, pretending to be the security worker Yellow Fruit. And there's like 3 or 4 of the Yellow Fruit episodes, and one of them features Bill Cooper as well.
That's a good segue to Tal Levesque and this breakfast that you had with him and John Rhodes, who I completely forgot about. I used to hear him on Coast to Coast a lot. He's the reptilian hunter.
Crypto hunter.
Yeah. But he mostly hunted reptilians. That was his thing.
Make some alligator shoes.
So you had an interesting, like, I guess, steak and eggs with these two guys, huh?
Yeah. So this whole adventure started with getting an email from someone who I didn't know who Tal was at this point, but I got an email in this was 2007 or so from somebody saying, "Hey, I'm working on doing some research, trying to drum up interest in a TV series called Mysterious Mariposa." Mariposa is a town not far from me here in the woodlands of Central California. It's kind of the beginning of the gold rush on Highway 49. And anyway, the email basically asks, hey, we're doing some research, hoping to put together a television series. Wonder if you know, have any information about strange happenings in around Mariposa. Somehow, this email sender found out I had, was involved in the scene somewhat of paranormal Fortean stuff. And he also said that he was the producer for an underground base episode on the program UFO Hunters. And so, I get a lot of email from people. It's, some legit, others just, who knows. And so I was a little bit suspicious. So I contacted Bill and Nancy Burns and gave them the email handle, which was Quest Tal. And they said, oh, yeah, that guy knows things. And I soon discovered it was Tal Levesque, whose name I'd kind of heard about over the years, and his association with underground mysteries and Dulce Base. And so anyway, decided to get together over a breakfast and learn more about what Tal and his buddy John Rhodes were up to. And that's the chapter in the book, My Breakfast with Tal.
Was there any interesting revelations that he...
Well, I mean, one of the revelations, he claims that he had an encounter with a reptoid back in, when was it, 1978. That's one of the more colorful aspects, and that this reptoid was from below the earth or from outer space. It wasn't quite sure, but it became apparent through my, with this breakfast meeting of the minds and also subsequent emails, what a major player Tal was in the whole Dulce Base story. And, I mentioned earlier, Benowitz back in '82 had talked about in one of his letters his suspicions of this base in Dulce and how there had been a confrontation of some sort. And this later bits and pieces of what Benowitz was talking about emerged in the Dulce papers, which came out in 1989, which John Lear had a hand in. And at the time, and I'm getting back to Tal here in a second, but and this, these were like 6-7 pages of kind of crude rendering, hand-drawn things of a Dulce base and the hybrid aliens and the vat and that whole bit, and a story about a security worker who had blown the whistle on what was going on there and had secreted out videotape and photographs and other evidence out of Dulce Base. And Lear claimed at first he was given these materials, these Dulce papers, by a man, but then he later, the story kind of evolved over time and claimed it was a lady by the name of Ann West. And so subsequently, more information came out about who Ann West was and her story. And this was shared by different writers, like Branton was one of them, and William Hamilton, Val Valerian. And as it turned out, it was all kind of the same story that got repeated with little different variations. And Tal Levesque was like the originator of much of these stories. And you had, these different people like sharing similar stories. It was this big confirmation loop, and Tal was kind of the guy behind the scenes. But the story was that this lady, Ann West, visited a guy named Thomas Castello in Santa Fe in 1979. At the same time, she visited her friend Tal Levesque, who was also living in Santa Fe in 1979. And at that time, Castello, who was a security worker at some shadowy facility, claimed this Ann West told her that he felt his life might be in danger, and that he encountered some really disturbing stuff. And so Ann West visited Castello and also Tal at this period. Tal was also working as a security guard type guy for the same firm, supposedly, that Castello was. They knew each other, but they didn't work at the same place. Kind of curious, but anyway, Castello came up missing at one point, and he'd been involved in some type of confrontation at Dulce Base, and he recontacted this Ann West and shared with her all of this material, these photos, videotape and stuff of this, and talked about there had been a confrontation, what later became known as the Dulce War, where 66 humans were killed when they when they found out what was going on with all this horrific testing going on at the Dulce Base. It was part of this secret treaty between the humans and the aliens. The aliens were giving their human counterparts, exchanging advanced technologies, and in return they were given humans to experiment upon, and thus began this whole alien-human hybrid. This alien race was a dying alien race, so they needed to do this hybrid stuff to continue their species. And there's also stories about drinking the precious bodily fluids of babies to keep the aliens alive.
I've heard that one before somewhere.
Sounds familiar.
So where I'm going with this is, so this was the story that had emerged with the Dulce papers and these other background, and how Tal had kind of been on the fringes of what was going on with this lady Ann West and Thomas Castello, and he became aware of it, and once again he became one of the people basically seeding this story into ufology, along with John Lear. In recent years, it's emerged that Ann West is actually a lady named Cherry Hinkle, who I interviewed a few years back, and but I over the years, I would ask Tal. I began to suspect that basically this Castello character, who later, Phil Schneider picked up on the same story and repeated the same claims, had been involved in, this.
He stole the stick.
Yeah. And I began to see what looked to me is that Castello was kind of a composite character put together partially based on Tal Levesque and Paul Benowitz, kind of a combination of those two. Tal, over the years, claimed that he had worked as, kind of the shadowy security worker at top secret installations. He had knowledge of this underground network of tunnel systems and bases, and apparently that's why Costello was living in Santa Fe. The claim was that a bunch of the workers from Dulce lived in Santa Fe, and they used this shuttle system to go back and forth. And this was kind of a lot of these old caverns and stuff were kind of been there for many, many years, and that there were these alien races living in them long ago. And, in more recent times, the government got involved and were using some of these excavating and connecting all these different underground bases that are also connected with the aliens. And, what also emerged with my breakfast with Tal was that he had been friends with Richard Shaver back in the day with the whole Deros story of the underground creatures. And back in the 70s, Tal and his wife, Mary Martin, had put out a zine called the Hollow Earth Hassle, which published from the mid-70s into the early 80s. So he had a long history in a lot of this hollow earth underground entities, which kind of morphed their way into a more modern version with the Dulce Base story. And he also had a lot of knowledge about, the whole thing with DUMBs, they call them, deep underground military bases, and the those different machines that the Rand Corporation tunnel boring machines that were being developed. And remember that a lot of the blueprints emerged in the 90s and was later published in a book by a guy named Richard Sauter called Underground Bases. That's where a lot of this dumb material.
I remember that book. Yeah.
But these blueprints and all this Rand stuff came originally from Tal Levesque, and he's the one who passed them on to Richard Shaver's. Tal's thing was always to be a man behind the scenes, so he has front people who passed on the information. John Rhodes is one of those. Bill Cooper, John Lear, and a lot of these other guys, Branton, and I mentioned before, Val Valerian with his Matrix series of books, Bill Hamilton. We're all interacting with Tal Levesque, but as I stated, Tal, because of, for one reason or another, he didn't want to be known as the key person promoting a lot of these stories.
Yeah, and Phil Schneider also, he's one of the first one that I ever heard a lot of this stuff from.
And Tal claimed that he was the one who provided all that, Dulce Base material originally to Phil Schneider. I mean, Tal said a lot of this. Well, I gave all these different people this stuff, and some of that I've been confirmed. I'm not positive about his interactions with Phil Schneider, but Schneider, however he got that material, it was basically riffing on the Tom Costello story of being involved in the Dulce War, and that's how Schneider supposedly lost a few fingers and got a nasty chest scar because he got in a fight with these laser beam welding white Draco aliens who were the overseers of Dulce.
Phil Schneider was also a great patriot too. He always liked to remind people of that every time.
Of course,
spoke.
yeah.
A great patriot. Didn't he die mysteriously? Didn't he like strangle himself or something? That's what I've always heard.
Yeah, I write about
Schneider.
it. Write about it in the book too. Well, I mean, it depends. Anybody who's etched out a place in conspiracy lore like he did, people are gonna believe that he was suicided, but there was some oddities around his death. And part of that, he had some mental issues, but he also had actual health issues, And during the autopsy, it was discovered that a catheter was wrapped around his neck that hadn't been seen when he was originally, when the cops originally found him, And so a lot of people, including his wife, started saying that, the deep state got to him, and et cetera, et cetera. Gabe Valdez did a lot of investigation into a lot of these claims related to Dulce, and found out some interesting stuff about Schneider, that at the time he was supposedly working. First, he said he was originally working at Dulce, then later was working at Area 51 as a geologist, that he would go down, they'd send him down, he'd look at the rock samples so they'd know what kind of explosives, whatever to use when they're building these different bases. But during the time frame where he was supposedly at Dulce in Area 51, he was also on
Love to see that resume.
Social Security benefits, living in Portland. And I talk about, there's some FOIA documents, FOIA documents that have come out in recent years, and I have them posted, I believe, at my Saucer Spooks and Kooks resource page at the Chasing UFO blog. But anyway, these FOIA documents revealed that in the 70s, Schneider came upon, he was at a bar or someplace and met some guy who gave him some bunch of rocks that turned out to be radioactive material. And he was sleeping with these under his bed at home and supposedly doing experiments or whatever. And the FBI caught wind of this, and that's how Schneider came to their attention back then. Also in those FBI reports, it was discovered that he was basically in a mental health facility for a while. He was a self-mutilator, hence the reason he had some of his fingers cut off and the chest scars, etc. And Gabe Valdez confirmed a lot of this stuff too, that this false history created around himself was just perpetuated delusion, but also a little bit of grifting going on there too. He used part of the thing you'll see in Schneider's materials are these documents that are on like official Navy stationery that apparently his dad plays into the story too. His dad was in the Navy, but apparently maybe it wasn't Valdez, but Norio Hayakawa had a source that confirmed that Schneider basically absconded some of this old blank Navy stationery and wrote some of the letters that basically letters he claimed his father had written that backed up a lot of his wild claims, letters that got into mash up of the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk, and also the Dulce Base story and
all the greatest hits.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of Phil Schneider. who's featured in a chapter called Another Flash Gun Hero.
Yes, and Schneider to me always kind of he kind of seems like he's really kind of like that precursor to the Martian super soldier craze that's kind of come down in recent years with Corey Good, and I had one on Conspirinormal. I had Captain K on way back when. Corey Good stole his shtick too, but it was all this kind of like the Montauk, Al Bielek kind of stuff. They age regressed me and sent me back through the time tunnel and all this, all the stuff that really happened, right?
Yeah, and there's variations to this confrontation story. There's also a version Bob Lazar claims that he saw some briefing memos that talked about a similar confrontational war that happened at Area 51. And one thing interesting in the Costello version, I talk about the flash gun that supposedly a pretty kick-ass weapon that allowed him to escape the Dulce War. This thing could vaporize and levitate and do all kinds of wonderful things. And this dawned on me recently. I don't think I wrote about this in the book. It was like another thing that came out of the original Benowitz material that at one point when he was putting together his Project Beta report, he talked about a space gun he was developing. This is Benowitz, that he said it's proven that it will destroy the aliens, and he was working on developing it. And so it sounds similar to all the stuff that Tom Costello's flash gun that later materialized and was talked about in the Dulce papers.
Like you said, it's all just so self-generating. Like as soon as one person has one piece to it, it'll get endlessly recycled and integrated into someone else's story. And
yeah.
So this stuff comes into the QAnon material now. Like you briefly mentioned it when you were talking about how like they live on the blood of the young or whatever, and the deep underground military base material is also in the QAnon. So this stuff is still around. It's being constantly recycled.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was another thing with some of the stuff Bill Cooper was coming up with, and others. It seemed like later David Icke. And kind of the hint, wink, wink, nod thing that Cooper at one time said the aliens had big noses, and that they were drinking. Yeah. So it's kind of the
blood libel.
Yeah, same thing you hear time and again.
That's important to show, like how, of course, Cooper was originally a UFO guy, and how much the UFO stuff was still part of the militia movement and the New World Order mythos. It was a big part of it. And like, I guess you pointed out how, I guess Tim McVeigh even went to like a protest at Area 51.
Yeah, there was definitely some crossover. Yeah. And the Cooper McVeigh meeting was, that's certainly an eyebrow raiser. McVeigh, like I said, he went out to Area 51, but also Waco when that whole thing was going on, and paid a visit to Bill Moore, gave Moore a copy of the Turner Diaries. Apparently, McVeigh had a bunch of copies that he was handing out to different people. But
the box of the Turner Diaries in his car.
Golly.
Yeah, but part of the overlap there with militia groups or kind of right-wing groups and UFO and interest in UFOs kind of happened during that period I was talking about with Billy Goodman and all these guys having conference, Little Alien, and having these trips out to Area 51 during that period. It was part of it was you had that's when these stories about the Whack-and Hut guards that were there, basically running out a lot of the people who were going to watch the UFOs at Area 51, and part of the interest, you had like Anthony Hilder. He's another kind of longtime John Bircher, and like I said, Cooper was there, and there was a group that Norio Hayakawa started, and part of it was in protest because they were starting to get pushed out by the these Whack-and-Hut security guards, and they were claiming it was, they were hiding something that was a threat to national security, and it was, more of that kind of protest you'll see nowadays on the left and the right about the overreach of the national security state,
Right.
those type of issues. So that was kind of the overlap in how ufology did this fusion with right-wing militias and anti-New World Order types, and like the whole UFOs were kind of tied into this. They were being kept secret from us because of, whatever reasons. There was some secret treaty with the aliens, or it was a cover for hiding this New World Order technologies.
Or like an economic angle with this like technology that could eliminate scarcity, but the elites still want to, keep it away, just like they did to Tesla back in the day or something.
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about, without giving too much away, how you wrap up this book. Me and Adam both really liked, because it's has to do with everything we've really been studying for the last few years. And the idea that, people are really interacting with a type of Chapel Perilous with this material, and that it can be dangerous to really become obsessed. And also, just to me, I wanted to add an anecdote that when all these guys were in their like heyday of, creating all these documents and building these myths, like it really reminds me of like the late 19th century occult world, where you have all these people, building myths and have mysterious texts and mysterious figures and organizations in the background pulling the strings, competing for power, and like there's something else to it, and you really point out how a lot of what this stuff is about is something else, not just UFOs.
Yeah, that's the afterword of the book called Adventures in Chapel Perilous, and kind of gets into a theme about a lot of characters I've written about over the years, Kerry Thornley, and on and on and on, James Shelby Downard, these type of characters. And Benowitz was one of those who went tried to cross the abyss and got trapped in Chapel Perilous, however you want to phrase it. Went a bit too deep down the rabbit hole, looking at whatever, and we all can find ourselves in that kind of same place where the point of going too far, when you can never extract yourself from called a rabbit hole or a Chapel Perilous, because you invest too much into whatever belief system. And there's a certain point where, like I said, I've been there. I talk about Greg Bishop in the book as well, and I think we were both at one point or another staring into that abyss. When you're researching whatever the subject is for me, it was kind of mind controlled research and whatnot. And part of it is looking into these topics, there's a bit of synchronicity that happens sometimes where all these odd patterns start coming together, which it seems like it's more than coincidence. I've often had this experience working on different projects where you keep going farther deeper down into the research, the rabbit hole, and you could drive you mad at some point. You need to step back and have some perspective, but there's a fine line. It's easy to cross over. I got close to that point, but it's just one of those deals that some people kept on going and were never able to get out of it. And looking at conspiracies and all these things, there's certainly a beneficial aspect where you're opening up new thoughts and new ideas, and there's a potential for growth and expansion or whatever. But there's also a point when you get too deep down into any particular rabbit hole that she once again becomes tunnel vision, and you get to that point where you're not growing and expanding your mind anymore. And that's the point where you need to step out of one rabbit hole reality tunnel and start exploring others, not get locked into any particular belief system. And that's kind of it's a trap that's an easy thing for a lot of people to fall into, because when you get deep into research and think you've discovered the answer to a particular conspiracy, there's a certain amount of ownership and significance that comes into your life, and you become part of that conspiracy that you were trying to be a rational observer or investigator about, and you actually become part of it. And that's where Chapel Perilous goes haywire.
Like magic, it's contagious, even if you're on the periphery.
Mm-hmm.
Well said, Adam. I mean, there is an alternative.
Yeah. I struggle with that. I've done a few interviews now, and that Chapel Perilous comes up, and I'm still not quite sure I'm able to describe it as well as I do in the book.
Okay. Well, this has been a great interview, Adam, as always, and we've barely scratched the surface of what you have in this book. So there's a lot more there. So tell people where they can find the book, and also I'd like to note that this is being published by the Daily Grail, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm. You could, go to the Daily Grail site and find the book, and that'll link you up with Amazon, basically, where you'll find the book. It's Saucer, Spooks and Kooks, UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius, and it's available both as paper book and as a Kindle.
Excellent. And it's always great to have you on. What's next for you as far as writing?
Still working on the James Shelby Downard manuscript you guys know about. So
we are eagerly anticipating.
Working on that.
Awesome.
All right. We'll go ahead and close out the show. I think, Adam, you're going to stay with us for a little Patreon segment about Project Serpo. And guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank Adam Gorightly for being with us tonight. Everybody, if you want to become a Patreon, Serfiel can tell you where to find that and what we've got going on there.
At patreon.com/Conspirinormal. You can get a new episode every week. $4 or $5 a month. At the $10 level, you join our mystic crew of Conspirinormal, and you get to hang out with us every month on a cool little Zoom call in which we have presentations and access to guests, festivities, giveaways, etc. And at the top of the mountain, you can become a member of the Ancient Circle of Strange Realities for $20 a month and receive all the secret hidden wisdom, as well as getting a cool exclusive t-shirt and a VIP experience at the Strange Realities Conference every year, which we have coming up, and we'll be announcing the actual lineup very soon. But we've given out all the basic information already. It's going to be a hybrid event, live in Nashville and streaming online. So either way you want to attend.
Yeah, so by the time that this episode comes out, we should have all that up on Eventbrite. $70 to come in person, $30 for the online event. So come join us October 15th through 17th in Nashville, or online if you want to. All right, guys, we'll be back next week on Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.